Why are isolated pawns bad in chess? Imagine a lone soldier standing in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by enemies on all sides. That's what an isolated pawn looks like on the chessboard. When you see a pawn with no friendly pawns on neighboring files, it's called an isolated pawn. Now, why is this considered a weakness? Well, it all comes down to how pawns move and support each other. Pawns can only move forward and capture diagonally. They relying on each other to defend and control key squares. When a pawn is isolated, it has no friendly pawn on the adjacent file to help defend it. That means the opponent can target it more easily. Since no other pawns can support it, the isolated pawn becomes a fixed target for attack. Opponents often place their pieces, especially knights and bishops, on the square directly in front of the isolated pawn. This square becomes a stronghold for them because the pawn can't defend it. The opponent can then use that outpost to control important parts of the board. As the game moves into the endgame, the weakness of the isolated pawn becomes even clearer. With fewer pieces on the board, the pawn's vulnerability grows. It can be captured more easily or blocked by enemy pieces, which limits your options. Also, an isolated pawn can weaken your overall pawn structure. Since it's not connected to other pawns, it doesn't help create a solid chain. This makes it harder to control space and defend other parts of the board. To make matters worse, having an isolated pawn often means you need to spend extra time and effort to protect it. You might need to bring in your pieces to guard it, which can limit their activity elsewhere. This can slow down your overall game plan. On the other hand, if you can use the open lines created by an isolated pawn to develop your pieces actively, it can sometimes be useful. But that requires precise play and a good understanding of how to balance attack and defense. So, in most cases, an isolated pawn is a structural weakness that your opponent will try to exploit. They will attack it, control the square in front of it, and aim to simplify the game into a favorable endgame. Knowing how pawns move and how they support each other helps explain why keeping your pawn structure solid and avoiding isolated pawns is usually a good idea in chess.